right, welcome to Where in the World Are They? How to Begin Locating Your Immigrant Ancestors. My name is Cheryl Smith. I work at the Haggard Library for almost 23 years now. And Sarah will be our backup and she's reading the chat. So make sure you say if you have any questions to ask her. Before you search, so the very beginning, you need to identify your immigrant and you need to have some research, the historical background on him or her. Look at American records first. You need, before you get ready to jump the pond, as people say, or go looking at other records, you need information about your immigrant. And we're going to work our way through that today. Don't start with the passenger list until you get your facts. I've had people come in going, well, we know he was here in 1821. So, we need to find his information before that, and come to find out we can find records for him from 1815 or even earlier. So if you don't have those facts for when he truly was here first, you're going to be looking at the wrong information for the passenger list and other information. So we need to work on that to get started. Just like in anything else, you need to have that genealogy background on the person before you start looking further back on him or her, I know. So let's talk about how to get started. We need to identify him, so we need that full name. It really helps to know his full name, the names of family members, because when you look at an immigration record or a passenger list, more than likely there's going to be more names with him on that passenger list, and you want to make sure you get them all at one time. You want that biographical information. How old are they? When were they born? Where were they born? When did they come over? Is there anything else that you can find out about them? And the traditions and heirlooms that you have about them is very good because it can help fine-tune where they came from. You want to know their friends because maybe they came with friends and not family, or maybe they came with a whole group of religious groups that come over, and you might need to be looking for a group that came over. Also knowing how the many different spellings of their names. So when you look in a passenger list or any records, you can see the different spellings. We had one person who knew that once they were here, this Stillabauer was how they were spelled, but he saw 4 different spellings and he thinks there probably could have been more. Sometimes also when you're looking at records, you can't find Constantine Vulgaris, but you might find Jenny or Athens. And once you find one of them, you find Constantine. I would have never known this is Constantine, except that the person who gave me this record for an example said he knew that all these others were family members. And so he had to believe that this was Constantine. So those are some of the things that you start off with. You also want to have the date of immigration. And that is taken with a grain, you just never know, because in the census records where you see where they immigrant, boy, I can't talk today, or what if they're naturalized, that date can change over census, it can change in records, it can change in stories. So you have to think around that date. Maybe not believe that it's just 1821 that I should be looking for, but 1817 to 1825. The place of departure can also be different because it depends. They may have left from Hamburg or some other port, but actually they live 200 or 300 miles from there. So the place of departure is just where they could get to a ship. And the port or city of arrival doesn't mean that that's where they stayed. It's just where they arrived and then they moved on. And sometimes it wasn't where they were planning to get off the ship, but that's where they ended up getting off the ship. And you've heard that they always got off in New York, but actually they went to Boston instead. And maybe it was because of weather, or maybe it was because the story wasn't right. The name of ship, where they, their original country, all of these things are ways to make sure you have the right immigrant. Because like with any records, there could be 3 different Stillabauers or Constantine Vulgaris on a record, and you have to know which one you want. Okay. Just a note, from 1607 to 1990, there were 57 million immigrants coming to America. That's quite a few. And we know with records that, probably maybe 10 million of those or so, or 20%, were never recorded or were lost in being recorded. So that's not fun. I seem to always find that it's the person I'm researching that's missing off of those records. So when we get started, another thing, after we identify the immigrant, we want to know a little bit about their background, the country they came from, the time period, their religion, and their ethnicity, because all of that gives you the confirmation of the immigrant you find. It also helps you to know why they came, maybe even to know the ship or who paid for their ticket, because sometimes it's a group of people that come over, a religious group that comes over, and what you're going to end up doing is searching for that religious group first, and then finding your immigrant in that religious group. Also, just knowing their background gives you the idea of why you may not find them or where you have to research them once you find enough facts about them. The best way to confirm your immigrant and get a good idea of where they came from is to work your way back to them. Do not jump to that immigrant and go from there to research them. Work your way back from you to your grandparents, your grandparents, and your great-grandparents before you start on that immigrant. You need to find all the facts. This helps you to confirm the date that you want them to look for the records. I know that I had somebody come in one time, and this is why I really stress this. Well, I know he arrived in 1841, and so I only need to look for in the immigrant records or passenger list and all for 1841. But when we went to look at his records in America, we found him in the 1840 census. We found that some of his children were born in 1839 and 1837, and we could find those records for America. So he did not come in 1841. So the patron would have wasted a lot of time looking at immigration records and passenger lists in 1841, when actually he probably came over in 1831 or 1835, some time period. So you do need to know those facts. Census is a good place because they did ask that question: when were you naturalized? When did you arrive? Where were your parents born? Where were you born? Those questions are on the census. And so those are great hints. The other thing, though, is whenever you do see where were they born or where did the parents, were they born, you have to also know a time period to know that if they said Prussia or Germany or France or any other countries, you may need to know a little bit about that country and what was going on in that time period to know where exactly were they from for that time period. And also knowing their birth, marriage, and death, make sure that you get the right one. There are a lot of names out there besides Smith and Jones that are very common on a passenger list. When you go to find them, you may see several Robert McDonalds, but you don't know which one you want. So by knowing their birth, marriage, death, any family stories, any other facts about them, you may grab at the wrong Robert McDonald. So these are the things that you need to have before you start searching. The other things that help is knowing where they came from to know where they probably landed in America. And I say that because not everybody landed at Ellis Island. I don't have my facts right here, but there's well over 100 major ports, and not everybody landed at Ellis Island. Many landed in New York and not Ellis Island, or in Boston. Some went all the way down to the coast of Texas and to Galveston. And you need to know these immigration patterns. There are some books in our collection that can give you that information. And as you can see in this map that's here, I just loved it because there's a lot of arrows and there's a lot of places they could have gone to. And knowing the time periods of travel and where they may have gone also helps you.
Okay, so it looks like we're having some technical difficulties. I'm Jessica. I'm here just in case anything like this happens. So let me give it just a moment and see if maybe they're going to jump back on. And I do apologize for the inconvenience.
Did I disappear?
Yes, you did disappear, but we got you back.
Wonder what happened. I just noticed. How long have I been gone?
Like 2 minutes.
So did you hear me talk about research of immigration?
Yes.
Okay. I'm
And
sorry.
Sarah dropped off too, so hopefully.
We must have lost a connection somehow or another. I apologize. Uh-oh. All right. Can we get started again?
Yeah, go for it.
I'm so sorry. I just was like, all of a sudden something happened. We had a message this morning. Our internet was kind of spotty at times, so I wonder if that's what happened. All right. There are many reasons why you immigrate. From this I was talking about purchasing tickets. And so there's groups that purchase, or you purchase your tickets. It could be that you're indentured. You're going to be working for somebody and they pay for your ticket. The time period makes a difference as to why you came over, the immigrant came over. Also, what we're going to need to know is where were the records kept in the other countries, and also where are the records kept here. And we are going to talk about that some more. And names and their misspellings. There are many reasons why names are misspelled. Partly, we didn't know how to spell. We didn't have grammar and all the different rules that we have today for spelling. It was how things sounded. So words could be misspelled, but not on purpose. Yes, every once in a while, names were misspelled on purpose or changed, partly because they wanted to Americanize their name. It wasn't always. Now, there is that possibility, but you cannot say, well, they looked at him and said, oh, we're not going to use Griskevich. We're going to name them Smith. That's not what happened. A lot of times it was more of, how do we spell Griskevich? And that's my son-in-law's surname. And he's been in our family for almost 14 years. And I still have to look at my phone to spell his name correctly. So, but those things do happen. And you have to just remember that. Passenger list. Now we're going to get into, sorry, one slide. There we go. Passenger list. Where are they found? Everywhere. The ports where they left, the ports where they landed, in newspapers, a ship's manifest and log, whoever charted the ship, medical records. Sometimes if they stopped along the way, they had a passenger list made there and then wherever they landed. So they made lists everywhere. And what you're going to hope is that you can find them along the way and that they were kept somewhere. So before 1820, there were not any real rules. They were not always kept. A list was not always kept. So one of my family members came over well before 1820. I've decided I don't really want to worry about him just because I'm don't want to research a lot in that direction. Because a lot of it means a lot of extra work, and I have too much to do right now. Maybe when I retire, I'll work on that some more, because I have to look for manifest lists, ship cargo, because they were considered more like cargo and not like passengers. So they weren't always listed. Now, a colony would control the immigrants, So the colony might have, that they came over to, might have a list. But it wouldn't be a passenger list. And so there may not be what ship they came on, and there may not even be where they came from. But they would have a list of those that were moving into their colony or into their area. And they had a lot of rules in those colonies, which is another class all in itself. But they had rules of who could live in their colony, because you had to have money or enough money, had enough knowledge to be able to support yourself. And if you couldn't, they would pass you on to another colony or another place. Sometimes it was listed in the country that they came from or somewhere else. It's just very hard to find pre-1820 records. All you're going to be looking for is maybe there's a deed or a probate or their name is in court. So it becomes a very hard place to find information. Don't want to worry you. You may be able to find it, but it does become harder to find. This is an old classic book set that everybody had to have, the Passenger and Immigration List. This was also called the Philby's book because that's who put it together. There are supplements, there's a lot of information. People, the libraries like us, we still have the books. Probably won't ever get rid of the books, but they are at Ancestry and also I think at FamilySearch.org. I haven't looked, but I do know they're on Ancestry. But that's usually one of the first places you go to look for your immigrant. We've always pulled it out. It's not an easy book because what you do is you find a name and then you find an abbreviation to the book or the magazine or the newspaper or whatever to go to see the original list. So this is just an index where they went through everything they could get their hands on that listed passengers and immigration and made it into an index. Another index that's out there is Germans to America. So if you know your nationality, there are several sets. There's one for Germans to America, Italians to America, and England or Great Britain to America. If it's a group, you may want to look for those. Now, that's a little harder because there are some books created out there, like the Swiss pioneers of southeastern Ohio, where they settled at, or a port, like there's the ship's passenger list of Port of Galveston, Texas, that we have. These are just examples of the types of places or books or items that you're going to look for. And there could be more. There's one way is to look to see if we have anything in our collection in the way of books, but there's also worldcat.org to see if there's even a book that covers that subject that you're looking for, like Swiss pioneers of Ohio or Swiss in Ohio. Those are some of the things that you would do in WorldCat, but we can always try other places, Ancestry, Family Search, in the books that we have. Those are ways to just start kind of digging for those lists. So after 1820 or about 1820, laws started going into effect. And this is when it kind of became a little easier to find records because it became official to create a passenger list. And so the Steerage Act was passed in 1819, and this was to require captains of vessels to submit a list of passengers. It also meant that they were no longer just cargo, they were people. and they should be cared for in a better way. The government started becoming involved in these lists, and they became important and were microfilmed and protected. Of course, not everything got microfilmed or recorded or kept like it's supposed to, but it was there and available. So now we're going to talk about the custom passenger list. It was from 1820 to 1891. The list must include the ship and her master, port of embarkation, date and port of arrival, each passenger's name, age, sex, occupation, and nationality. Over the years, this changed. The list, the columns, everything, those that information is reported and recorded in other things. The major ports were Baltimore, Boston, New Orleans, New York, Philadelphia, and some of the minor were at the Atlantic Gulf Coast, sorry, not Gulf, but Gulf Coast and the Great Lakes. I said there was 101 ports through the 19th and early 20th century, but there's also ports and stations from Canada and Mexico. The National Archives also has these lists, and they became the place to store all the microfilm and the records at the National Archives. And those microfilm could be bought by different people. And so Dallas Public used to brag, and I mean, they still do, and they had all of those records of the immigration, the passenger list on microfilm at their library. Now, all of that microfilm has been digitized and is available at Ancestry. So there are ways to look at these records. But I will say that sometimes the index is not always correct, and it's easier sometimes just to look at the scan itself rather than to depend on the indexer, because they didn't always read the handwriting the same way as you or I would read the handwriting. Some of the history and laws that changed over the years were that they were abusing the immigrants, and so they had to get into trouble if they misabused them. So there were laws that were made in effect in the 1820s to 30s to keep these companies from making too much of a profit by, stuffing too many people in the bow of their ship. And so there were some rules that were set up. In the 1840s, Congress got involved and created lots of different laws. We won't go into that, but you can research it if it's the time period that you need to know about your immigrants coming in. 1875, one of my favorites is that if you were lewd or immoral purposes, you couldn't come in to our area, to America. We excluded any convict, lunatic, or idiot in 1882. There was an exclusion of Chinese. This was just, there were too many coming in, but they did allow students or businessmen or diplomats. We started in the 1890s, the federal government started to be in control. And 91, the ship companies were responsible for taking passengers back to their homelands if we denied them. There were just more laws, and I didn't list them all because, well, there's just too many. And really what you need to do is, depending on the time period, you would need to research to find out what was going on during that time. In 1891, there were some new regulations and who was in charge of things, and so they became immigration passenger list. And standard forms were created, so the earlier records were kind of scattered on the passenger list. They weren't always a perfect information, where it was nice, neat columns. There may not fill in all the information, but starting in 1891, they wanted more of that information, and they created a template or standard form, and every column had to be filled out. It wasn't just drawn lines or it was still handwritten, but it kind of was neater. It's kind of funny because it wasn't always absolutely neat. That's part of the problem with the immigration records, I think, is that they, whoever would take the information sometimes had pretty bad handwriting. In 1893, one of the things that's very interesting is it jumped from 5 columns to 21 columns on what we needed to know about that immigrant. So in the beginning, it was just their name, their age, where they were going, where they came from. And now there was just all kinds of information that they wanted to know about them. And the columns just changed and changed. And that again is more research and information for you to research. And we have books and information on finding that. Has anybody got any questions, or are you answering them, Sarah?
That's it. We had one question, but I have answered that. Everything seems good so far.
Good deal. All right. We're going to talk about other information in the books and just all kinds of ways to go about finding. So the births and deaths were not required by law to be documented, but they did. And that means on the ship. But most of them, if there was a birth or a death, they ended up in the captain's log, or they may end up being listed at the end of the records. Stowaways were added to the end of the list, or they became part of the crew. So all of the records are microfilmed or should be microfilmed. And as I say, I like that in the research that I found that it was anywhere from 10 to 40% are missing. Well, I prefer 10%, but 40% missing. And if we know that 57 million people came over, if 40% are missing, well, that's nearly half of that 57 million that their records are missing. So it's kind of sad, but I just know these are some of the facts to know about things and why it's hard to find them. So let's go on. Other places to look at for records is records of aliens, and held by special inquiry means that it's at the National Archives or at other specialty libraries like the Balk Institute for Ethnic Studies. That's where you can find the originals located. But like I said, everything or most of it has been microfilmed. And the National Archives or these others have them available, but they've also been digitized. In the early days, all we could do was depend on the microfilm, and they weren't even indexed. And so a lot of times you had to know the time period and the place that they came in and then try to do an interlibrary loan or go to the National Archives or go to the Balk Institute to look at the microfilm itself. So it was nice when the indexes were created during the Depression and they're start digitizing these records and making it more available. Some things to remember about passengers that may not show up is if they were ill or had no money, they had to be sent back, and so they may not have made it on the list. Sometimes they would not be allowed into the country if they were a single woman and nobody came to pick them up. So those are just some other things to remember about trying to locate an immigrant. Ellis Island. I find this is one that everybody believes or thinks that everybody came in at Ellis Island. Some of the things to remember is the time period that Ellis Island was open was 1892 to 1954. Before 1892, it was just New York or Castle Garden or the barge office. Then there was a fire, so then it became the barge office again, and then it went back to being the Ellis Island. So it's not always Ellis Island. They say about 12 million of the 57 million people that came into Ellis Island. It could be higher, it could be less, but part of it is that if you left from Ellis Island and came back to Ellis Island because you went to get your family and come back, you're counted as an immigrant again. Or just counted as landing at Ellis Island. Also, during that time period, that's where the presidents and other people would leave, is from Ellis Island to go to a country and then come back to Ellis Island. So that's why it's hard to know how many truly were immigrants or just people leaving and coming back after going to another country. Things to remember is that it usually only took about 3 hours. By 1892, immigrants knew what to expect. There was some anxiety that happened, but most were comforted and knew what to expect by the time they landed in 1892. Remember, we had been arriving into America well in 200, 300 years before that. So, well, not 300, but well over 200 years before that. So we knew what to expect, or most of the immigrants knew what to expect. Naturalization records is another way to look for information. There were different rules over the years. At first, we didn't have naturalization, and then you had to wait 5 years until you naturalized. There were different things that happened along the way. You might have naturalized whenever you landed arrived in America, or you may do it when you arrived in America, say in New York or Boston, and then you did it again when you made it out to South Dakota. But you would do it several times, or the immigrant would do it several times. Sometimes when they naturalized, it was 5 years later, and they didn't always have all of their records with them. And so when they naturalized, there were times when they were guessing at the time that they arrived, and that information is not always accurate. So those are some of the things to remember, is that you see that naturalization record, And you go, oh, look, they said that they arrived in 1891, but they were guessing. And then you find that there wasn't this ship that they said they arrived on in February 1891. It was actually in 1890 in February and not 1891. That's pretty good, just a year off. Or they'll think, well, it was cold, so it must have been March or February or in November or December, but they might be off again in their estimation of when they arrived. So these are some of the things to remember about naturalization records. They are great to find because you can find that they did land in New York, or they're listed, they're naturalized in New York or in Boston. And hopefully it tells even in there that they got married in between when they landed and when they naturalized. There's a lot of great information. And
Okay, we have a question about the naturalization records.
sure.
Where exactly can you find them?
Well, that's on the next slide, but many of them, they're not all in one place. And they can be found in federal courts, municipal, marine, criminal, there's just a lot of places. There are a lot of records on ancestry and family search. You can find them in books. We have some microfilm records for the Texas naturalizations. They're not for every year. They're only for certain time periods. And so they're scattered everywhere. So I always start with what do we have in books here at our library or any library nearby. And then I look for, and this is the problem too. Whenever it comes to the naturalization, you're going to first assume that this is the place that they landed and they stayed at. So I'm going to look first at the naturalization records for Collin County because, hey, they're here. They've been here since 1856. So they probably are going to be those naturalization records for Texas, for Collin County is what I really want. But guess what? They're not there. So did they fill it out? Did they fill it out actually where they really came from, Tennessee or Kentucky? Or did they fill it out before that in New York, wherever they landed? So you have to look at each of those places. You're going to look at the library. You're going to look to see what Ancestry has on naturalization records. You're going to look to see if the courthouses have naturalization records and what years they have. It's not an easy answer, but whenever you do start that research, you watch where they've been and make notes, and then try each of those areas in looking at what do they have on naturalization records. And it is a possibility to be anywhere. Most of the records were microfilmed, again, just like with others, because it is a government document. And so hopefully they're microfilmed and stored. We have some for Texas naturalization records. We have some records in books for different states, but it's an index or an abstract, not the records themselves. And so, and sometimes you're not going to find a naturalization record, you're going to find a declaration of, what was the word? Declaration of intent. So those are the different kinds of records that you hope to find along the way. And there's more in the laws of what was kept, because we didn't even touch on here where in the beginning it was just the man, the head of the household. And then eventually they said, no, the woman has to be naturalized also. And then, okay, now really it's the whole family that has to be naturalized. Or, and then if your husband dies or you get a divorce, then you have to be naturalized. So there's a lot of ways to find the naturalization records. Other records to look into. Did they go into the military once they came to America? Social Security records, homestead, did they get some land? How did they get the land? Where did they get the land? Does it give you any information? Homestead records and deeds and land records, you never know what hidden story might be in there. Depending on the time period, there's alien registration, visas, passports, looking in census. There's a lot of ways to go at it, and that's why knowing as much as you can about that person will help you know where else to look. Because if the person ends up landing here, going into the military, making money, they might have some more information mentioned in hidden records, or not that they're hidden, it's just that, oh, I never thought of looking at homestead record, and look, there's this little bit of information there that he came from Germany. Whoa, so you just never know what's hidden out there. The alien registrations, those are a little harder to find. Sometimes something jumps out at you. There are some books, there are some bits of information here and there. There's a possibility that it's in court records for the county. Sometimes it's in the state records. We have state libraries that might have the records, and sometimes they can be on Ancestry, Family Search, and other databases that are out there. One of the things that I wanted to make sure you understand is, in the other day, hang on just a second, excuse me. An index gives you some great information, but because it's a short blurb, it will have initials, abbreviations, short titles, short information, and it's hard to understand what it's really telling you. So read the introduction. I have so many people that come up to me and go, what does this mean? And I turn to the front of the book, and there in the introduction, 9 times out of 10, it tells you what that abbreviation means, or what that index information that you're finding will help you understand what that index is telling you. Double check your records. This is always the way to do it. Did you get the right Robert McDonald? Double check what you have, what you found in the information. One of the things, though, that I do is if I found 3 Robert McDonalds and they seem close to each other, I will keep information on each one of those until I strike out or say, okay, no, you're not the right Robert McDonald I want. But I still, even after I say, nope, not that Robert McDonald, I don't throw it away or erase it or, say, oh, I'm done with him. I keep that other Robert McDonald somewhere in my information because, one, I may run into him again so I can remember why I said, no, he's not the right person. So always make a note too of why you said, that's not my Robert McDonald. And it's not spelled right is not a reason to say that's the wrong Robert McDonald. It always has to do with what I say, 3 strikes. Birth date, they're not at all alike. One says November 1891 and one says January 1995. Well, okay, that's way off. So, a date, a place, and maybe who he's married to or who his family is. makes 3 strikes, that is not the right Robert McDonald, but always hang on to him just in case until you're really sure. Remember, facts are wrong. And it may be that it's not facts, but stories that you've been told over and over and over again are not quite right. And once you do your research, you're going to find out, oh, we've been off by 3 years or 10 years. And so I had this wrong, and I need to adjust it to what is correct. And like I've said before, names are spelled wrong. Indexes are not complete, and indexers make mistakes. That is always the way to go into things. With the census especially, indexers of today, looking at census from 1850, I don't know how many times they've read that handwriting wrong. And I look at it, but part of it, I have to say, is I know my family's names. And when I look at it, I can tell that it says Gordon Broom or whatever I'm looking for. But the indexer sees it as something different, which then messes up trying to find Gordon Broom on the census. So you can fix it. You have to sometimes look at the original yourself and just scan and look at things. But just know there are mistakes. Nobody's perfect. And so sometimes you're going to have to look page by page and line by line. And I thought census can be bad to look page by page, image by image. I did that line by line. I did that for the 1940 census looking for family. But whenever I went to passenger list, especially when they didn't have lines and it was just kind of written across, and you know how handwriting, you can think you're going straight across, but you start going downhill a little ways and the handwriting can be just bad. So that's why sometimes you have to know that family member or friend that came with them, because maybe that name is spelled better or the handwriting is better for that name, and then you can recognize the person you're looking for. And like we've said all along, the more you know, the better it is when you're researching them. And it helps to wheedle down which passenger list you want to look at. I still, when I go into Ancestry, I still go broad first because I just want to look at all the different Robert McDonalds that came from Ireland and then landed in New York, or if I'm pretty sure that my Robert McDonald came down to Galveston, then, you know, it helps. And I'll just look at all the Robert McDonalds that came into Galveston. But those are the things to think about. Immigration is easy. No, it's not. This is probably one of those places where immigration becomes something for an intermediate or experienced person that's done research to do more in exploring. We have a lot of books here on researching here in America and researching across the pond or into the other countries. We have guides and information. We also have Ancestry Library Edition. And it is going to be remotely available until September. We've been working on our connection problem for the last couple of weeks. So I'm not sure how to get into Ancestry Library Edition today. But I do know that if you type in at our library at one of our computers, ancestrylibrary.com, you can get into our database. But I don't know what else is effective yet. I got in at noon today, and so there's a possibility it could be available remotely soon. But I don't know yet. But I do know it has been, but we had an update and things changed. So we're working on the problem. But it has that is the first place I go to for looking for immigration information, the passenger list. Familysearch.org. These are the steps. You have to choose United States and look at migration and naturalization. Fold 3 has a lot of information. It has a lot of naturalization records available there. Fold 3 is part of the National Archives or the government records. But again, not everything is available. Excuse me. Not everything is available at any one of these 3 places, but it's kind of scattered. The archives.gov is the National Archives, and they tell you about how to research immigration, and they give you information. It is one of the places where I went to get a lot of information to create this class. Archives is still not open to the public yet, and they are still not providing just common research. They are only doing emergency research because they are not open 100%. They are still only open to like 25% staff. So they are only doing emergency research at the National Archives. Ellis Island does have a lot of great information, but you have to remember the time period. Chronicling America is a government, is produced by the Library of Congress, and it has a lot of the early newspapers online, and there are ways to get to early passenger list in Boston or New York by going to their early newspapers. Also at Chronicling America, if you're looking for other newspapers, it will tell you where other newspapers are located and if they're available for interlibrary loan. And we can help you with that further. The one thing I do suggest, if you have any questions, is to email us at genealogy@plano.gov. That reaches out to the 6 or 7 of us that know our genealogy and can answer questions. You can come into the library and visit with us. We are open at the Haggard Library down in the lower level of the library, and we are open the same hours as the rest of the library. And we do have staff available to lead you to the books that we have or the databases, or try to answer how to research in France or Germany or wherever else you're wanting to research. We have ways to get to that. But before I get to the last slide, are there any other questions?
Nothing so far, but if you have questions, please enter them into the chat or in the question and answer, and I can pass those along.
I don't want to discourage you. I have not worried too much about my family and where they came from. I did do my DNA, and pretty much we came from England, Ireland, or Scotland. And I'm like, okay. So someday, like I said at the beginning, I might do some more research just to figure out where, but because it's before 1820, I feel like, hey, I've been in America a long time, so I'm not that interested, but someday I might. If I had landed in 1920 here in America, my family, then I might be more interested to find out when and why we came over. But so now, not all of these classes are online to sign up and register for yet, but I just want to let you know this is what's going on this summer. We're showing you Ancestry Library Edition, June the 21st. Let's hope everything is up and running by that time. It should be. And another database that we have is History Geo. So we're going to have a class on it. It is a great place to go to because it does show you those first landowners if you have family. It also lets you see a lot of historical maps that are available. And on the, if your person lived in a state or, you know, here in Collin County, say, and they were those first landowners, it's fun to see their deeds and surveys. It's also fun to see where they were in the 1840s as to what is going on in that area today in 2021. And the last class that we have planned so far is genealogy terminology. And this one's not been that easy because there's too many terms out there for us to decide what to talk about. But we're going to try to reach out about medical and occupations and legal terms that are out there that we've forgotten or that may not be used any longer.
Okay, we did get a couple of questions.
Good.
First, do you need volunteers in the Genealogy Center?
We are accepting a few volunteers, but what we have is digital collections that need metadata created for them. That means that when you look at that image, you can describe it and create something so that we can upload it to our digital collection. We don't use the volunteers to answer questions or help patrons. That being said, though, if you can read German, French, Swiss, Dutch, you know, other languages, we always want to keep your name in case we get somebody that asks us, because we do get asked, can somebody read this German handwriting for me? Or this will, and I'm like, yeah, I don't know anybody, but you know, those are the things that we do use our volunteers for. You have to go through the city's website of the link to the VIP is what it's called, Volunteers in Plano, and that's through the city's website. What's another question?
Somebody asked if the presentation will be distributed, and I let everyone know in the chat. So
Yes.
this presentation will be available on the Plano Public Library YouTube page. And you can also find the link for that on the Genealogy Center website.
Right. And you will get an email with, there is a handout that for this with all the books that are listed and other information, and you should be receiving that in the email. Anything else?
We did have somebody comment that both sides of their family are likely to have landed in the 1700s, pre-Revolutionary War, so they may need help.
Well, you can come in and we can try. And I, you know, that's whenever we had to start looking at the colony records. And we do have many records for the different states, you know, those first early states. We do have lots of records. So. Well, that's it for today. If there's not any other questions, we're glad that you all joined us, and don't get discouraged. We can try to help you. I've been working on it for others. Even if I say I don't do it for myself, I still help others. I prefer to help others.